It all started on the first night we moved into the house by the woods. The realtor had warned me about the isolation, but I was looking for peace, somewhere quiet to write, to recover, and to be alone with my dog, Rusty. He was my only real companion after the accident that took my brother's life 6 months ago. That night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., Rusty began scratching at the front door. It wasn't like his usual whimper for a walk routine. This was frantic. He paced, growled, scratched again, then looked at me, wide-eyed and trembling. I let him out, thinking he just needed to relieve himself. But instead of stopping at the lawn like usual, he bolted straight toward the woods. I called after him, heart racing. I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my boots, and chased him down the narrow, unmarked trail that disappeared into the forest. I didn't get far. The moment I stepped between the trees, a wave of nausea hit me. The air was thick, heavy with rot and moss. The darkness between the trees felt unnatural, as if it moved on its own. I called Rusty's name, but only silence replied. A long, suffocating silence that wrapped around me like a wet blanket. Finally, I heard his bark, faint and distant. He returned about 20 minutes later, covered in dirt, his golden fur matted with leaves and something darker, something that smelled metallic. From that night on, the same thing happened. Every night, always at 2:13 a.m., always the same desperate scratching. And every time he returned, he seemed different, restless, as if something was calling him and he was powerless to resist. By the 5th night, I noticed a strange object tied to his collar, a piece of twine with a carved wooden bead. The bead had a serpent design etched into it, coiled in a spiral with fangs bared. I'd never seen it before. I pulled it off, tossed it into the trash, and decided to keep Rusty indoors. Big mistake. He went berserk, barking, growling, slamming his body against the door. I'd never seen him like this. It wasn't just instinct. It was possession. The next morning, I asked around the nearby village about the necklace. A few people shrugged. Others pretended not to hear me. But one old man at the general store looked me dead in the eye and whispered, "The forest remembers. Don't let your dog lead you to what it wants." I was about to press him for more, but he turned away, shaking. That evening, I decided to follow Rusty, not just to the edge of the woods, but all the way. I needed answers. So, at 2:13 a.m., when he started scratching again, I was ready. Flashlight, jacket, gloves, and a knife just in case. Rusty didn't hesitate. The moment I opened the door, he bolted down the trail again, tail low, head focused straight ahead like he was following a scent I couldn't sense. I followed him into the dark. The trees seemed to lean closer the deeper we went, branches like hands tugging at my clothes. There was no path, just dirt, leaves, and the occasional glint of snake eyes reflecting my flashlight. I felt watched, stalked, not by something chasing me, but something waiting for me. Rusty suddenly stopped, standing perfectly still at the edge of a clearing I'd never seen before. I stepped beside him, heart pounding, and that's when I saw that the clearing was unlike anything I'd ever seen. A circle carved into the earth, worn and cracked with age, its edges rimmed with tangled roots and dense moss. In the center stood a towering stone shrine, covered with creeping ivy and ancient symbols that twisted and curled like the bodies of snakes. The entire structure radiated an eerie stillness, as if time itself had slowed or stopped here. I shone my flashlight across the carvings. Snakes coiled around one another, mouths open, fangs bared. Their eyes, carved from dull red stones, seemed to glimmer with life in the beam of light. I swallowed hard. Rusty, normally excitable, suddenly sat down quietly beside me, tail resting against the dirt. He looked calm, too calm. I took a cautious step forward. The ground beneath the shrine was hollowed out, forming a pit filled with writhing, slithering snakes of all sizes. Hundreds of them, their scales shimmering under my flashlight's beam, silent but watchful, their tongues flicked in and out in hypnotic rhythm, the sound barely audible above the crunch of dead leaves. My throat tightened as I realized something unnatural. The snakes weren't aggressive, but they were focused on something. Someone. The massive shape of a python began to rise from the pit, its body thick and golden scaled, eyes glowing with otherworldly red light. Rusty's ears twitched, and he looked up at the python without fear. Instead, he wagged his tail gently. My skin crawled. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. This wasn't just a shrine, it was a sanctuary, a place of worship, a throne for this monstrous serpent. Then I noticed the collars. Tied around the vines that wrapped the shrine's base were dozens of dog collars, old, frayed, some barely recognizable. Each collar was unique, showing signs of years of wear, chewed and weathered by time. My eyes scanned the collars, and my stomach churned. Carved beneath each collar on the shrine's stone base were names. Human names, some of them familiar, some I'd never heard before. There was one collar, distinct and new-looking, hanging just above Rusty's head. I reached up slowly, my fingers trembling as I touched it. It had the same serpent bead tied to it as the one I found on Rusty's collar days before. But now, it looked older, worn by time and weather. My breath hitched when I saw the names. One was my own. Suddenly, the massive python lifted its head higher, its jaws opening wide in a silent hiss that seemed to echo through the clearing. The air turned colder. The trees bent inward, blocking out the moonlight. The forest grew deathly silent. Rusty stood, turned to look at me with eyes that no longer seemed his own, dark, hollow, and distant. A shiver ran through me. I realized then that the shrine was no ordinary monument. It was a trap, a gateway, a curse. And Rusty was no longer just my dog. He was the key. I didn't remember how I got back to the house. One moment I was standing frozen in that haunted clearing, the glowing eyes of a giant python burning into my soul. The next, I was stumbling to the dark forest, branches tearing at my skin, lungs burning with cold air. Rusty was nowhere in sight. When I finally reached the porch, I slammed the door shut behind me and locked every lock I could find. My hands shook uncontrollably. The house, once a refuge, now felt like a cage. Days passed, but Rusty never came home. The silence was unbearable. Every creak and shadow made me jump. I found myself checking the windows at night, fearing what might be lurking outside. Then the scratching started again. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the door scratched as if something desperate was outside, just like before. But this time, it was slower, deliberate, like a warning. I forced myself to open the door. There he was, Rusty, or at least what looked like him. His golden fur was dirty and matted, but his eyes, those black, soulless eyes, stared into mine. No wagging tail, no excited bark. Just cold, empty darkness where his soul should be. Around his neck hung the twine necklace with 2 wooden beads now. One was a serpent spiral, the other a tiny human face, carved with frightening detail. It was unmistakably mine. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut and backed away, heart pounding. Since then, the scratching continues every night at the same time. Sometimes I see shadows moving just beyond the windows. Whispers fill the silence, words I can't understand but feel deep in my bones. I try to leave the house, packed a bag, but something pulled me back, a force stronger than reason. I dream of the shrine, the giant snake's cold, glowing eyes watching me, calling me back to the woods. I see Rusty lying peacefully at the altar, surrounded by snakes, waiting. I fear the curse isn't just on my dog. It's on me. And soon, the scratching at the door will stop being a warning, because the shrine wants me. And one night, when I follow Rusty into the woods again, I may never come back.